a string, and we'll import ./header.css and save. So now that we created this header component, we can reuse it in the homepage and the orders page. We'll open homepage.jsx, and at the top, first, we don't need to import the header anymore. It's already done by this component, so we can remove it. And let's import the component using import curly brackets, the header from a string. And now we need to locate this file. So currently we're inside the pages folder. So we need to get out of this folder using .. and then go into the components folder, components/header. And now we'll use this component in the HTML. So down here, we'll insert less than header / greater than and save. So now this HTML is a bit easier to work with because we split it up into smaller pieces. Let's do the same thing with the orders page. We'll open the orders page JSX, and at the top, we don't need to import header.css, and instead we'll import curly brackets, the header component from a string, and we'll locate .. /components/header. And down here, instead of this HTML, we can remove this and just use the component less than header / greater than. And this helps us reuse and save a lot of code. Let's save and then view the website. The header looks good in the home page, and if we click here to go to the orders page, the header also looks good in the orders page. So we're able to reuse the header component. Next, there's a small issue with the header. When we click a link, like this link in the top left, it actually reloads the page when we go to another page. So by default, link elements or A elements reload the page. Now this made sense before when our website had multiple HTML files. To go from one file to another file, we have to reload the page. However, now that we're using routing and a single page application, we don't have to reload every time. We can just use JavaScript to switch between pages. To do this, React Router provides a component called link. So we'll go back to our code and we'll open the header component. And at the top, we're going to import curly brackets, the link component from the package React-router. So the link component lets us go to another page without reloading. To use it, we just have to replace our link elements or A elements with this link component. So here, let's replace this with link, and at the end, /link. And also, instead of the href attribute, the link component uses a prop called to. So this will link to this page. Let's scroll down. And in the header, we have two other links, the orders link and the cart link. So we'll switch both of these as well. So here, we'll switch it to link and /link, and we'll switch the href to 2. And finally, switch this to link and /link, and switch href to 2, and save. And now let's open our website to try it out. If we click this link to go to the orders page, you'll notice it's a little bit faster because now it's using JavaScript to essentially display a different page without reloading. So when using React Router, we should use the link component instead of the A element because the link component lets us go to another page without reloading. Now let's save these changes into Git. We'll go to the Git section, and here we split up the header into a separate component. And then inside the header, we switch to using the link component to switch between pages. Let's type the message, split header into a component, and use link, and commit. In the next lesson, we'll add a backend to this project and make it interactive. So we'll be able to display a list of products and add products to a cart and create an order. And that's the end of this lesson. In this lesson, we started the e-commerce project using React and Vite. We reviewed Git, which helps us track changes in our code. We learned routing, which lets us create multiple pages in React. We created the homepage, the checkout page, and the orders page in React. We updated all the links to work with routing. And we separated the header into a component. Here are some exercises to help you practice what we learned in this lesson. In this lesson, we're going to start making our e-commerce project interactive. And then we'll learn how to use a backend with this project. By the way, if something in this lesson does not work for you, you can check the troubleshooting guide in the description. First, if we look at our website, currently we only have 3 products on this website. But in the final project, we have a lot more products. So we're going to add all of these products to our website. So let's go to the code for the home page. We'll open our code and go to the files. And we're going to find the pages folder and open homepage.jsx. So this component represents the home page. And we're going to scroll down and find the element with the class product-container. And we're going to click here to collapse this element. And we're going to collapse this other product container and this other product container as well. Each product container represents one product on the page. To add more products, we could make a copy of this code and add each product manually. However, that would be very repetitive. Instead, we can generate this HTML using React. We already learned this technique in the chatbot project, where we generated a list of chat messages on the page. So we're going to review how to generate the HTML. First, we need to save the data for these products in our JavaScript. To save time, I already did this. So if we go to our files and we go to the starting code folder and we open this data folder inside products.js, I already saved the data for the products in this array. So we can just use this as our data. Each object in the array represents one product. So it has a name, an image, and a price, and some other details. The next step is to use this data to generate the HTML. We'll go back to the home page. And first, we're going to import that products array. So at the top, we're going to import curly brackets, the products array from a string, and we're going to locate that file. So first we need to get out of the pages and source folder using ///, and then we'll find the starting code folder and the data folder. Starting -code /data/ and the products file. Next, we're going to loop through this products array. So at the bottom here, above these product containers, we're going to insert, using curly brackets, the products array dot map and brackets. And we're going to give map a function, brackets, arrow, and curly brackets. As a review, dot map takes each value in an array and transforms it. In this parameter, we get each value in this array, which is a product. So again, a product is just this object, and it has some details about the product inside. So we'll go back, and we're going to transform this product object into this HTML. To do that, we're just going to copy this HTML, and inside .map, we're going to return brackets and paste that HTML. And to fix the formatting, we're going to press Control or Command Shift P, and then search for Format Document, and press Enter. And let's scroll up. And remember, whenever we loop through an array like this, we need to give each element a key prop equals curly brackets. So the key helps React keep track of changes in this array. Now, the key has to be unique. So looking at the data, each product has a unique ID property. So we'll go back, and we're going to use the product.id as the key. So this basically takes each product object and transforms it into this HTML. So now let's save, and we'll check the website. And as you can see, we took each product and transformed it into some HTML. Now, obviously, we don't want the product to be socks every time. So let's insert the details of each product. We'll go back to our code, and instead of displaying the socks every time, we're going to remove this and insert, and each product object has a name property. So we'll insert the product.name. And let's also replace the product image. So instead of showing the socks image every time, we'll remove this, and we'll insert the product.image property. Next, we'll insert the ratings. The way this works is that each rating has an image, and we just have to multiply the rating by 10 to get the image name. So for this one, we're going to put open curly bracket and close curly bracket around this value, and we're going to change this to a template string using backticks and backticks, and then instead of 45 every time, we're going to insert. And remember, for template strings, to insert, we use $curly brackets. So in here, we're going to insert the product.rating.stars and then multiply it by 10. And this should give us the ratings image that we need. Next, we're going to replace the rating count. So curly brackets, and we'll insert the product.rating.count. Next, we'll insert the price. So instead of this price every time, we'll insert the product.price cents. And we usually save money in cents because many programming languages have trouble calculating decimal numbers. Now, when we display it on the website, we want to display it as dollars. So to convert this back to dollars, we're going to divide by 100, since $1 is equal to 100 cents. And that's it. We inserted the details of each product into this HTML. This is the same technique that we used in the chatbot project, except our data is just a little more complicated now. Let's save and check the website. And now we have a list of different products on the page. And we generated the HTML for these products. Now there is a small problem here, which is for these socks, it's showing the price 10.9. But usually for price, we want to show 10.90. To fix this, we'll go back to our code and we're going to scroll down to where we insert the price. And to force this to show 2 decimals, we're going to wrap this in a open bracket and a close bracket. And then outside of this bracket, we'll use the method .to capital F fixed and brackets. So this converts the number into a string, and inside these brackets, we can tell it how many decimals to show. So we'll put 2 and save. Now if we check the website, all the prices show 2 decimals. So that's a review of how to generate the HTML using some data. Let's go back to our code. And now that we're generating all this HTML, we can scroll to the bottom and remove this default HTML that we had before and save. And now let's save these changes into Git. We'll go to the Git section, and at the top, we'll use the message generate the HTML for the home page and commit. Now, we're going to take this project to the next level and go beyond what we did in the chatbot project. We're going to add a backend to this project. So first, we'll learn what a backend is and why we use a backend. So right now, if we look at our files, notice that all the products are saved in a file on our computer called products.js. The problem with this is an e-commerce website or an online shopping website might have thousands of products, and it does not make sense to save everything on our computer or on the customer's computer. We might not have enough space on our computer. So what the company or the store does is they set up another computer in their office or in what we call a data center. And this computer saves all the thousands of products that they offer. And then when we visit the website, this computer sends us only the products that we need to display. So this computer is called the backend. It's just another computer that's owned by the company, and it manages all the data. Here's another example of why we use a backend. Later in this course, we're going to add products to a cart. So where do we save this cart? It does not make sense to save the cart on the customer's computer, because if the customer uses a different computer to visit the website, they would no longer have access to their cart. Instead, we save the cart in the backend as well. When they access the website, the backend sends the cart to the website. So the backend also lets us share data between computers. So again, the backend is another computer that manages the data. And this is how a React website works in the real world. We usually contact a backend to get the data. So we're going to practice that in this course. We're going to learn how to add a backend, and then we're going to learn how to use the backend in React. So you can see how we use React in the real world. Now that we learned what a backend is and why we use a backend, let's add a backend to our project. We're going to click this link in the description, go to lesson 7, and click this link to open the backend code. And this is a backend that we can use with our project. I called it the e-commerce backend AI because this was built with AI, and I show you how to do that in another video. But for this video, I recommend downloading this version to make sure it works with the video. You can try to recreate the backend as an exercise. So we're going to click this code button here, and we'll click download zip. Once that finishes downloading, we're going to open the downloads folder. So for me, it's right here. And then we're going to unzip this. On Windows, we're going to right-click the file and then click Extract All. And on Mac, you can just double-click the zip file. Then, we're going to move this backend into our project. So we'll open our code, and then we're just going to drag this folder into our project. But first, I'm going to collapse these folders for now, and we're going to drag this folder to the outside and click Copy Folder so that the backend code is right beside our website. By the way, we call the website, or what the user interacts with, the front end. We're also going to rename this folder, so right-click and rename, and we'll just rename it the e-commerce backend to make it easier to understand. Next, we're going to start this backend. So we're going to go to our terminal or our command line, and we'll click here to create a new tab. And then in here, first, we're going to change directory into the e-commerce backend folder. So we'll cd e-commerce-backend. So now the command line is running inside this folder. And the process for starting the backend is very similar to the website or the front end. So first, we're going to npm install to install all the npm packages that we need. And then we'll run npm run dev to start the backend. So this tells us the backend is running on port 3000, which is localhost :3000. To test it, we're going to go to our browser, and at the top, we're going to create a new tab, and we're going to go to localhost :3000 /API/products. And the backend should send back some data. And this is actually the data for the products. I can also click this checkbox here to show it in an easier to read format. And you can see this is the same products array that we were using before, except this is coming from the backend. So the way a backend works is when we access the backend using a URL, it will send back some data. So this is working. So now let's go back to our code, and we'll save these changes into Git. Open the Git section, and we'll use the message add e-commerce backend and commit. Next, we're going to learn data fetching. Data fetching means to get data from the backend using our code. So first, we're going to go to our files, and let's go back to the e-commerce project, and we're going to open our home page, which is right here, and we'll scroll to the top. And one way to fetch data or to get data from the backend is to use the function fetch and brackets. So fetch is a built-in function. It's provided by JavaScript. Between the brackets, we're going to create a string, and we're going to put the URL that we want to get data from. So if we go back to our browser, remember that this URL gave us the product's data. So we can just select this URL and copy. And in our code, we're going to paste it into fetch. And make sure you have http:// in front. It doesn't show in the browser, but we need this in order for our code to work. So if we fetch data from this URL, this should give us the products data that we saw earlier. However, we cannot save this data in a variable like this. And that's because when we contact a backend, it takes time for this code to reach the backend and to get a response. So this code does not finish right away. It finishes at some point in the future. As a review, we call this asynchronous code. Asynchronous code means code that does not finish right away. So how do we handle this situation? Fetch returns a promise, and a promise lets us wait for asynchronous code to finish. So a promise has a method called .then and brackets, and we give .then a function, brackets, arrow, and curly brackets. The way this works is that this code contacts the backend to get some data, but it takes some time for the backend to respond. So the code is going to keep going line by line. Then, at some point in the future, this is going to finish. We're going to get the response from the backend. When it finishes in the future, it will run the function inside .then. So that's a review of how a promise works. So next, when fetch gets a response from the backend, it will save it as a parameter in this inner function called response. By the way, when we contact the backend using fetch, this is called a request. When the backend responds with some data, this is called a response. So this parameter contains the response from the backend. And inside here, let's just console.log the response to see what it looks like. We'll save and then check our website. And we'll open the tab for our website. And we're going to open the console. Right-click, inspect, and the console. And you can see that we got the response from the backend. So inside here, we have some information like the URL that we accessed and a status code. 200 means it was successful. However, notice that we don't have the product's data in this response. To get the product's data, we're going to go back to our code. And this response object has a method called response.json and brackets. So .json gives us the data that is attached to the response. In this case, it gives us the product's data. Now, the tricky part about this is response.json is also asynchronous. So again, we can't save this in a variable. Instead, this is also a promise. So we have to use .then again and give this another function, brackets, arrow, and curly brackets. And then inside this inner function, we have access to the data that we get from the backend. So in this case, this is the product's data. So if we console.log the data and save, and then check the console, you'll see that the backend gave us an array of products to display on the page. So this is the same thing as the products array that we saved in our file, but this data is coming from the backend. Let's go back. And that's how we fetch data or get data from the backend. We use the built-in function fetch and give it the URL of the backend. And then we use .then to wait for a response. Now, one shortcut we can use is instead of doing .then inside another .then, we can also return the response.json and then move this .then to the outside. So this code does the same thing as before. This .then waits for this to finish and then runs this function. So this is just a shortcut that we can use with promises. Another thing to note is the backend can also run on the same computer as the website or the front end. So right now, this backend is actually running on our own computer. Localhost means our own computer. So when we contact the backend, we're actually just contacting our own computer. We do this during development because it's easier. But once this website is on the internet, the backend will be another computer. So now let's save this code, and we'll save this into Git. In the Git section, we'll use the message fetch data from the backend and commit. Next, notice that using fetch is still a little hard to read. we use a .then, and then we use response.json, and then another .then. To make this code cleaner, we're going to use an npm package called Axios. Axios is a cleaner way to make requests to the backend. First, we're going to go to our command line, and we'll open the tab for the front end. And here, we'll press Ctrl+C to stop the Vite server, and we're going to npm install Axios and type @ and we're going to give it a version. So we can click this link in the description and then go to lesson 7, and this is the version of Axios we're going to use. So again, you should always use the version that you see on your page. So select the version on your page and copy it, and then paste it in our code, and press Enter to install Axios. Once that's installed, we're going to run npm run dev to restart the Vite server. And then to use Axios in our code, we're going to go to the home page, and at the top, we're going to import Axios without curly brackets from a string Axios. And now, instead of using fetch, we're going to use axios.get. So this does the same thing as before, except the data from the backend will be saved directly inside the response. So instead of doing all these steps, we can just get the data using response.data. So let's console.log this to see if it works. So console.log and save. And then if we open the console, you'll notice it gets the same products data as before. But if we look at our code, it's a lot cleaner because we can just get the data directly from the response. So as you can see, Axios is a cleaner way to make requests to the backend. So now let's save this into Git. In the Git section, we'll use a message, use Axios to fetch the data, and commit. Now, let's use this data from the backend to generate the HTML, instead of using the products file that we had before. But first, we have a problem. This code is directly inside the homepage component. That means whenever the homepage changes or re-renders, it will run this code again and send another request to the backend. However, we just need to load the products once on this page. We don't need to load the products over and over again. To make this code run once, we can put it inside a use effect. At the top, we're going to import curly brackets use effect from React. And above this code, we're going to do use effect brackets and give this a function, brackets, arrow, and curly brackets. Use effect lets us control when some code runs. We're going to move this code inside the use effect. So we'll cut, and in here, we'll paste. And I'll select these lines and press Tab to reformat. By default, use effect runs this code every time the component is created or updated. But we can control this. At the end of this function, we're going to add a comma and an empty array. As a review, this is called a dependency array. The dependency array lets us control when use effect runs. If we use an empty array, that means this code will only run once after the component is created. And that's exactly what we need here. We just need to load the products once on this page. By the way, you might notice in the console that use effect runs twice instead of once. So this is totally normal, and it's caused by using strict mode in our app. Strict mode runs use effect twice to help us catch bugs, and it only does this during development. So now that we have the data, how do we use it in this loop down here to generate the HTML? To do that, we need to save the product's data inside the state. So at the top, we're also going to import use state from React. And at the top of our component, we're going to do const square bracket equals use state and brackets. As a review, use state gives us an array with two values. The first value is the name of the data. In this case, we'll name it the products. And then we'll type a comma. And the second value of use state is the updater function. The updater function lets us update this value, and then it will regenerate the HTML. We usually name the updater function set and then the name of the data, capital P products. And finally, between these brackets, we're going to put the starting value of the products. Let's just use an empty array. And now, after we get the products from the backend, we're going to save it into the state. So instead of console.log, we'll use the updater function set products. This will save the products data into here, and then it's going to use this to generate the HTML. So now we're using data from the backend to generate the HTML, and we don't need to import this file here anymore. So the only thing to note is that the name of the data has to match the name that we use down here, so that this code is actually using the state. Now let's save, and we'll check the website. And everything still works, except now we're using data from the backend to generate this HTML. We'll go back to our code, and we'll save this into Git. In the Git section, we'll create the message, use data from the backend to generate the HTML, and commit. Next, if we look at the website, in the homepage, we also need to get the cart from the backend because we need to display this quantity number up here. To do that, we'll go back to our code, and we're going to make another request to the backend to get the cart. So below this request, we're going to use Axios again. Axios.get brackets a string, and we'll give it the URL http://localhost:3000/API/cart-items. The way this works is the backend is running on HTTP localhost:3000. And after this, we add a URL path. Each URL path gives us different data. For example, the URL path /API/products gives us the products data. The URL path /API/cart items gives us the cart data. So the URL path can actually be anything we want. Whoever creates the backend decides what the URL paths will be. In the description, you can find a documentation page for my backend. And this lists all the URL paths that we can use. A common naming convention is to start the URL path with /API. API means Application Programming Interface. Starting with /API makes it clear that these URL paths are specifically for interacting with the backend. So we already learned how to use /API/products. Now we're going to learn how to use /API/cart items. And remember, whenever we make a request to the backend, it's going to take some time to get a response. So we need to wait for this code to finish using .then. And then we'll give this a function. And the response is going to be saved in here. So when we make a request to /API/cart items, we're going to get the cart in the response. So in here, let's console.log the response.data to see what the cart looks like. We'll save, and we'll check the console. and you might need to refresh. And the backend responded with an array. And this array represents the cart that we have on the website. So each item in the cart contains the product ID that we want to buy and the quantity of that product. So next, we're going to use this to calculate the quantity and display it on the page. So we'll go back to our code. And first, we need to save this cart into state so we can use it to create the HTML. At the top, we'll create another state, const square brackets equals use state brackets. And this state will save the cart, comma, and the updater function set capital C cart. And let's set the starting value of the cart to an empty array. And we'll scroll down. And now once we get the cart from the backend, we're going to save it in the state. So instead of console.log, we're going to use the updater function set cart. And now the cart from the backend will be saved inside this variable. And remember that the quantity for the cart is inside the header. So we need to pass the cart into the header using a prop. So here we'll add a prop cart equals curly brackets, and we'll give it the cart. Let's save this file, and we'll go into our code and go to components header.jsx. And then inside the header, we're going to get the cart from the props. To do that, at the top, we'll type curly brackets and the cart. As a reminder, this is a shortcut for this code. And now we're going to calculate the total quantity in this cart. So at the top, let's create a variable let total quantity equals 0 to start. And then we'll loop through the cart using cart.for each brackets, and we'll give it a function. And the inner function will get one parameter, which is each item in the cart. So we'll call this the cart item. And then each cart item has a quantity. So we're going to add that to this total quantity up here. We'll do total quantity plus equal the cart item dot quantity. And now we can scroll down till we see the cart quantity down here. And instead of 3 every time, we're going to insert the total quantity and save. And now if we look at our project, now it will display the total quantity using data from the backend. So now let's go back to our code. And if we scroll up, you might see an error here for props validation. Again, this is an older feature of React, so we can disable this check by going into our files and opening eslint.config.js. And then we'll scroll down. Inside this rules object, we're going to add a string react/prop-types colon the string off. So make sure it's inside this rules object. We can save. And now if we go back to the header, the props validation error should be gone. So now let's save this code into Git. We'll open the Git section and we'll create a message, get cart from the backend and display quantity and commit. Next, if we go back to the homepage, so in our files, go to Pages and Homepage, and scroll up. Notice that for each request, we're sending it to localhost 3000. So we can actually set up a shortcut in Vite. So we don't have to type localhost 3000 every time. So we can actually remove these and save. And then we're going to go to our files and we're going to open vite.config.js. And inside here, we're going to add the property server colon and an object. And inside we'll add the property proxy colon another object. And in here, we'll add a string /API colon, and we're going to give this an object. And inside, we'll add a target property colon and the string HTTP colon / localhost colon 3000. So this is called a server proxy configuration. This just means that if the URL